Okay, I'm going to call the November 23rd meeting of the Untitled Parking Committee to order at 8:15. Delays due to technical issues. The first item of business is to approve the November 9th minutes. Yes, thank you, Rob. They were appreciated. And thank you, Bob, for taking minutes today. So the next item on the agenda is just a list of things that we need to be talking about as we go through, and not intended that we would necessarily get through all these today, but this is just the start of what we keep out there. So the first two things are things that I know, well, especially the first one, is something that Samantha was wanting us to make sure we're ready to bring to council in the near term. And I'm sorry that she's not here today because I can't speak fully to it, but it's making some adjustments to our current parking ticket late fees because they apparently are causing a problem with the court. And when the court has to get involved because someone doesn't pay the ticket on time. And Michelle, is this something that you could bring us up to speed on?
Sure. So March 2020, we stopped sending the violations to the court for citations. When we got back into doing 2-hour parking zone ticketing, we wanted to go back and start sending the citations to court. I had never done that before. Matt West was always in charge of that. So I spoke to the district court to see how we would get that process going. What they said was before we do anything, they had some outstanding issues. One being that the $5 late fee wasn't coming over. So they were getting the violations at $15 when they should have been $20 after 48 hours per our ordinance. So we went back, we had to do we went back to our UP safety for the parking violations. They said, go to AOPC, which I was unfamiliar with, but we had to do everything through them. So it's sort of like a big process. So within that, Chief Gallagher and I spoke and we said, would it be easier for everyone if we just made the parking violations $20 rather than having that late fee? It would be easier for people paying it, worrying about paying it within 48 hours if the office is closed, they didn't know how to do it online, etc. So that's sort of where we got to.
Okay. And is this something that we're going to have to do through an ordinance or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And I believe John Walco is working on that with Samantha. There is an ordinance, I believe it's 934, that we have to, I guess, cancel out.
Okay. Do you know if the plan is to have this before council, at least to consider advertising next week? Is that?
That is the plan, yes.
Okay. And so once we adopt this, so that we do, what does that mean?
So if we adopt it, then the fees change for the parking tickets, and we update, our fee schedule, the court's system, and the parking controller's device.
And so everything that can kind of automatically work through the system, not going to have anything get hung up in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So then it's just one fee. Yeah.
Okay. And what does it do to the citations that have been held that haven't been processed? What happens with those?
I'm not sure. I know that Chief Gallagher and Samantha were discussing sort of, starting from scratch when that happens. Mm-hmm. We don't know how much basis we have for that if we send it after the fact. We're still looking into that.
Okay. Okay. So more to come on the, I guess, is it just the citations for March 2024 or there aren't any older than that?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. March 2020 to the end of 2021, I would imagine, if we can get the ordinance in.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the rush to get it kind of going so we can start.
So yeah, nice, clean right to January 1st. That certainly. Okay. Thank you. Mm-hmm. The next item on there is the parking payment technology options. And I know that Samantha has been in contact with Park Mobile to get some information from them. I don't know if you are familiar with any of that, Michelle, if you've been involved in that. Or if that's
I know she had a conversation with them, I believe it was last week. I'm looking at we have some information on basically how it works. And I've used Park Mobile in Lower Merion, so I'm sort of familiar and I'm very supportive of it. But I don't know, I don't have any of the information on pricing and I'm not sure if she has received that yet either.
Okay, all right. So I know that's another thing that she was hoping to maybe present to council at the mid-December meeting. I think wanting to get us moving on what we'll need to do to, what we'll need to have in place as we.
Comment about she wrote us a pretty detailed email about how Meter Up Park Mobile, how the app would assign a numerical number to like a parking region or district. And she recommended one number for residential parking, one number for short-term.
I don't remember that.
I saw the same. Did you see this?
I don't know if that was.
It was on the it came along with pamphlets from Meter Up.
This is,
PDF.
Oh, okay.
that's what I have. Maybe I missed an attachment.
Is it
Was there an
one of those-
attachment?
There were 5 attachments,
Well,
So let me just talk about rather than what she said. My takeaway from that was that there would be separate districts defined by a number and code, and there would be one for residences. There would be one for a separate one for, I forget what we call them, short-term users like caregivers,
Yes.
guests. Not necessarily a different number, but there would be a system to facilitate the permitting guests. And I guess that they can add as many of those, different regions as possible.
I mean, I would certainly think you would want something that has that flexibility.
Seems like-
I
it just seems
apologize
very-
that this
It
is
just
all,
seems very flexible.
well, yes, I think it probably
Maybe
is.
that's enough.
Because other communities use it, so and seem to use it successfully, so, yeah.
And I mean, I know that we're concerned about, say, for example, the area around the train station, like how that might be used. But it could have its own, it could be assigned its own number.
Right, exactly.
And then-
Yeah. Okay. I will loop back with Samantha and well, first, look through all my email again and make sure I didn't miss an attachment. That's okay. I'm just wondering what I missed.
Possible.
Is it possible it's one of the things from Lancaster or Pittsburgh that the guy from Park Mobile sent us?
Could be.
That
I
might be
just
it.
read them all, and it's like-
Well,
and it goes in and makes a.
yeah, I kind of skimmed them all, but I didn't
Makes sense.
interpret any of them as Samantha making recommendations. I
Well,
interpreted it as,
I guess I saw the way the system worked as a
Yes.
recommendation. So
well,
the system itself is a recommendation. So,
Yes,
and
it
it works
is.
a certain way.
right. And I would think we would want to,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
it's just all its possibilities.
Great.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying about, that's the email from.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's not really
Not
Samantha's recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob, that cleared that. So, I guess our next thing that I hope we would talk about, is again, these are kind of in the order of what Samantha was hoping to move along, very quickly, was municipal lot parking, but I don't know what all she wanted to say about that, and I don't know, Michelle, if you. I'm
That's
guessing
I could speak to on.
you can.
I can't.
You can. Okay. I didn't think so. So we will table that until our next meeting. Okay. So residential parking, I think there's a bit that we can chat about in there, whether we come to definite decisions today or not, but we can at least start with that. I want to start with a question that I don't know, Michelle, if Samantha has passed this to you. You had compiled the list of 2-hour zones, and the question I had, because the parking study task force in the report said that there needed to be a current inventory of the 2-hour zones, because they felt like whenever they asked staff, and this was granted, in some cases before your time, I think, about that, they got answers that were like, well, we don't really know, or there's, whatever. It just wasn't, they didn't feel like, oh, there's a list. So I was curious how you compiled your list.
Sure. So that was compiled by eCodes, and it's on the eCode portion of the website.
Okay.
It listed out exactly how I sent it. The thing that we're not 100% sure about isn't where the ordinance says 2-hour parking zones are, it's where the signage is.
Okay.
So we run into issues, and the 200 block of Dudley Avenue was one. It was Dudley Avenue when we had the construction at 114 Forest, stating that one side was 2-hour parking, the other side shouldn't be. Some of them thought it should be, and there was signage in different places, and it was very confusing. So then that brought the bigger question of, is the signage throughout the borough consistent with the ordinance? So that's the inventory that we really need to take.
Yeah, I see, that makes sense, because with the snow route, we ran into that.
Yes.
Where the signs don't match, and then we fixed it.
Yeah.
So now we.
But in this case, the ordinance was what was way out of whack, because the ordinance only listed like 4.
Yeah.
Just so funny. So do we have an inventory already of the signs through the GIS data that was done? Because I thought they supposedly tagged every sign that we have.
Yeah, they should. Yeah.
So it's more just a matter of
Seeing what we have and what we should have.
and matching it up. So okay, so I guess there's a possibility that we could find a sign saying that it's a 2-hour zone and it's not in the ordinance, and so then the question would be, what do we do about that? Do we just take the sign down? So at some point you'll come back to us with that, and then there might be an ordinance saying it's 2-hour zone, and the sign, for whatever reason, maybe it got up, but then it got knocked down and it needs to be replaced. So, okay. Do you have a plan for when that comparison is going to be done?
Sure, we can work on that for the next parking study meeting if you'd like.
Okay.
I'm not that familiar with the GIS software, but I'm sure it's something I can figure out.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, other than I know that when you go onto the borough's website, you can look it up and overlay a bunch of stuff, but how do you get detailed, granular?
Right, so and that map on the website doesn't indicate, different roads. So like one side of the road, like the odd side will be 2-hour parking, and the even side won't. It just has a straight line saying that's 2-hour parking. So I wouldn't go off of that necessarily.
Yeah, no, I meant more in the sense of, I don't know that it gets granular enough to say, here's where the sign is,
Yeah.
I just don't know. I've not dug into that data to see if that's on the website. Okay, that would be great.
So you're kind of proposing a little bit of a go slow thing with removal of signs, because we might find that the residents are accustomed to that sign being there. We might want to make an adjustment to the ordinance. Is that why you're saying not just remove the sign?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying, I don't know that we've even talked about should we keep the signs or not. I'm thinking,
You just said like, well, maybe we should just.
no,
Yeah.
can I can I clarify what I
Just a
said?
question, yeah.
Yeah, what I was saying is, if we find that there is a sign somewhere for a 2-hour zone, but our current ordinance doesn't have that in there, what do we do? Do we take that particular sign down? Or do we say, no, we want to change our ordinance? And that's just something we'll have to decide. Once we find out the results of this, what do we want to do about any mismatches? That's all. I'm not making any suggestions about broader changes than that at the moment. Rob, anything on? So, as we've been working through the, just talking about residential parking, and we're at this point where we're thinking about putting in for the existing 2-hour zone area as kind of an initial run of this new way of doing things. We talked about how we would do permitting fees and do, have a different structure where there would be a fee for the first permit and then an escalating fee for a second or a third permit to park an off-street parking. So we've got a couple of questions that we still need to, I think, decide on around that. And I see 3. There might be some more if you guys have some others to think of, but just kind of make a definite decision on whether we want different fees for that first permit for people who have a driveway versus those who don't. Decide what the base rate fee would be, because then that would, the other fees would escalate off of that. And then decide if we want a maximum number of permits per household.
So can you state 3 different fees for people that have a drive?
Yeah.
So you want maximum.
What's the base rate? What would the base rate fee be? And then do we want a maximum number of permits per household? And can you think of any other kind of granular things around that?
Well, one would be, there could be an incentive for it.
Thank you, forgot that. Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah. So do we want to just tackle them in order?
Sure.
Okay. So, Nelson Nygaard in their report, has proposed different fees for households with driveways and those without. And I think the thinking there was if a person has a driveway, if we charge them a permit, charge them for a permit to park the first car on the street, that would incentivize them to use their driveway. Also, for the person who doesn't have a driveway, their option is only to park on the street. So, it seemed reasonable to say, well, your first permit would be free because you don't have any other place to put your car. But I know we've talked in here about the value of parking for everyone. And should we be reflecting that value in the same way for all people? So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, it also meant that the task force seemed inclined to have the same fee for folks with or without driveway. They were skeptical of having different fee structures.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought I had that marked in here and I was like, oh shoot. I think I had a flag on that, but.
Oh yeah, this is on under top recommendations, so I guess that's page 2.
Yeah.
And then going on to top of page 3.
Mm-hmm.
The Nelson Nygaard suggestion of charging different fees based on whether residents drive was met with more initial resistance.
Yeah. Okay. So they were suggesting that. Well, then their next suggestion was rolling out in phases so that it didn't overwhelm staff. But remember, Samantha said that's not really an issue. That it's so they kind of made a recommendation and kind of not, I think, and they're saying, basing it on whether people have a driveway was met with more initial resistance. Well, Where did they end up then? Did they change that or not? We don't know, so. So it's, I totally get it, it's not an easy decision to make.
Mm-hmm. So I would be inclined to just have same instruction.
So, but does that mean that everyone then would say, I guess what we don't really know is what does that mean when they say, charging different fees based on whether residents had a driveway was met with more initial resistance? Does that mean that they felt that everybody should get one off-street permit free, or that everybody should have to pay? We don't know what they.
So here's how I think about it.
Yes.
There's limited, the number of parking on street parking spaces on like any given street, right, is a limited resource. Only a certain number of spaces on that street.
Mhm.
If you have the driveway, you're not really obligated by the borough to buy a permit because you can park in your driveway in order to, whereas if you don't have a driveway, you basically, the deal is if you want to park on your street, you have to buy a permit.
Or if you just want to park in the borough, period.
In the borough, right. If you say you don't buy a permit, your driveway, you're still on occasion going to use that on-street resource, maybe even for short term.
Yep.
Which impinges on your neighbor's ability to say, like, park when they come home, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, to me, there's like, I think we're trying to create some equity, like cost sharing between people who have parking spaces to park their cars and people who don't have spaces to park their cars. And I'm saying this as someone who has a driveway, so like, you know, what I'm saying is because it's a limited resource and it's a problem for my neighbors that they don't always have a place to put their car. I feel that we're kind of collectively responsible to allocate that resource as fairly as we can, especially to people who don't have places to put cars. And it should cost all of us something. I also think this goes to sort of the maximum number of cars that you can use, because if one household, say, has 5 cars, they're disproportionately taxing that resource, that limited resource, so that a family with 1 car is going to have a whole lot harder time parking near their home because their neighbor may have 5 cars. Do we just want to allow that? Like say that, well, too bad. Like it's all of the same value. I don't think it is. I think that there's a responsibility to help every resident have a place to park. And I think it's been done really unequitably over the years. And a good chance to try to restore that. Both equity for people who don't have cars at all, by saying like, yes, the street's yours too, but also for people who really have just 1 car in their driveway should. So I'm not trying to say that better, but I think the differential fee structure begins to address that problem. Maybe it's not a perfect solution.
What do you mean by differential? The
The
escalating?
The differential meaning like it's different costs depending upon your situation. If you have a driveway, the cost is going to be different than if you have no driveway.
Okay, now
Maybe the cost, that's differential.
and I thought you were arguing for the same cost for everyone, so now I'm confused.
No, I'm arguing
Could you describe your?
Well, I'm saying I'm not arguing for anything. I'm just saying that I think that the on-street parking is of different value. If you don't have a driveway, it has a different value to you, and that value shouldn't only be the cost of that value shouldn't only be assumed by you. It should be assumed by your neighbor who also has a driveway, who's also going to use those spaces on occasion. And that's why I don't know that the differential rate structure addresses that, but I think we should think of how to address it. I think the Nelson Nygaard was pointing to it, and I think it's a good idea that if you have a driveway, you should pay more for your first permit.
Okay, oh,
Because,
okay.
because if you're gonna put your car on the street for more than 2 hours,
Mhm.
you're using a limited resource, especially for someone who doesn't have to drive.
Mhm. Oh, okay.
So are you saying though that, I think this is what I hear you say, so correct me if I'm wrong, that if you don't have a driveway, you should be paying something for that first permit.
Absolutely, well, you can
And
pay
then-
something, sure.
Right, but that if you then have a driveway, you should be paying, say, 25% more than that or something.
Or something more.
Okay, gotcha. So moving away from this idea that there would be a free space, in other words, that we all have some cost sharing.
That would be, so this is to your second question, do we want to term the base rate? I agree, I think there should be a base rate, because really, free parking is for someone who doesn't have a car.
Gotcha.
Right? Like if you're a
Yeah,
kid who doesn't have a car,
yeah,
you have a right to use the street as much as anybody else, it's a right of way.
right.
And if you're an adult without a car, you have the right to that space also.
So basically what you're saying there is that, the base rate is what the person who has no driveway pays for their first permit.
Yes,
That's our base rate.
yeah.
Yeah, and then everything hinges on that.
So there's an incentive to have no car.
Yeah,
Now, maybe if you want to build an electric car incentive,
yeah.
maybe there's a
Maybe you pay half of that or something.
a base rate.
Mhm.
Right. But it does get complicated because then you have to verify, somebody has to test that they have an electric car. Well, it's not that complicated.
So like, Rob, yeah,
Well, it sounds like you were endorsing the Nelson Nygaard system where there was no charge for the first, or no, it's a variation of it. So you're saying a homeowner without a driveway.
Right.
But, and then a homeowner with a driveway. And
Yeah, electric.
a larger. So it's a little bit different, the structure, than what came to.
Because so Nelson Nygaard, there are conditions. The first one would be free to someone without a driveway.
correct.
So
Right.
and I think
And I was unclear with that. I was
more comfortable with the base rate. That's Barbara was suggesting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I could support that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, could we just put a number just to make it a little more real?
Sure.
Let's say $20, because that was recommended by the task force.
Yeah.
As a base.
That was their low rate for the base.
Yeah,
20 to 25.
So let's say it's 25, right?
Okay,
But
so
let's inflation. But let's say that then the driveway rate would be 50. I think it should be significantly different.
For the
It's
first
not
one.
just like
yeah, no, that makes sense because you have an option.
Yeah, you do.
Okay.
So then that
Or at
would
least
be,
one car, I mean-
so second car or driveway. Right?
Yeah.
Is 50. Or you could even just say second car through whatever, I don't know, we should have a cap maybe on the number of permits you can have per household.
Yeah.
Because then, if you do have a child who has a car,
Yeah.
but let's say you have a large family, and each child has a car, they can go figure out where to put their car
Yes.
a block away, or,
Well,
like, so maybe often it's only a block away.
yeah, but
For example, if you live on the 100 block of Grayling, at a 2-hour zone, literally, it's just around the corner, you can find, or on the 200 block of Grayling, or just
Yeah.
around the corner on Windsor Avenue, you can find a zillion spots.
Yeah.
You put your overflow there.
So, okay, so 25, yeah, it helps me to get.
yes, I know, it does. Yeah, I agree. It helps to have numbers.
Okay, so 25 is the base rate. That is 4 driveways. It's 50. Oh, okay, that works.
Yeah, so if
Yeah.
you're,
Or
yeah,
maybe we say second, and third for driveway.
yeah,
I mean, they recommended 100, I guess Nelson might get 125% base rate.
for the households without driveways for a third, but for the households with a driveway, at 20%, 200% twice.
Right.
And I personally like the idea of charging more for the third permit as a way to just.
Yeah.
I just think it's the right thing to do, because that's a lot. If you're parking 3 cars on the street, you're taking a lot of resources off. And I do know of people who have, a third kind of junky car that they just kind of have hanging around.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this would people think about, do I really need that?
What's that?
Yeah.
Third cars is max.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I wrote here base rate 25, second and driveways 50, third car 100. And then, so if someone has a driveway,
Could you just to make it a little clearer?
Just base rate.
Base
no
rate,
driveway.
yeah, no driveway, and then,
This is the base rate for driveway. 50
yeah, that's what I was thinking, yeah, just to make it a little clearer, because
driveway.
we know what you mean right now, but when we look at it later, we're going to be going, wait, what was that?
And then, so then second is 50 if you have a driveway.
Yeah,
And third is 100.
yeah,
Is that the maximum? So Michelle, I wrote base rate 25, no driveway, 50 driveway, second car 50, third car 100.
And then that's the max, right?
so,
Maximum number of permits.
Oh, I see.
With the exception of those specialty permits, like because, daycare. Like an address ought to be entitled to have as many, that they have a temporary thing, visitor, or they have a daycare.
oh, you mean for the guest pass?
Yeah,
Oh, no, the
passes.
guest passes wouldn't be
Those,
limited, I don't think.
I don't think so, because it would be more like a daily or weekly fee,
Right.
so
Right, yeah.
which we have to determine those
So-
prices too.
So if we do a limit of 3,
So,
so the one thing that we'll have to think about, we don't have to think about it today, because we're not talking about doing this. What we're talking about right now is what we would do in our existing 2-hour zoning areas. Right? So if we're someday though expanding this to the whole borough, then I think we have to think about, well, okay, so if you are the family that has 4 cars, and the maximum number of permits, 3, how do we help you find a place to park that 4th car? And so maybe that maybe there's other, I don't know how we're gonna address that. That's
I mean, you could just keep going up.
That's what I was thinking, we might have to tap one. So maybe see how this goes with this for now. This is gonna give us some good data about how many families in the borough have. I don't know. I had one on my block, but it was kind of temporary while one of their adult children was looking for a job in another part of the country and finally found moved away to the far away.
I used to see it a lot. Like I own a Woodbine lane, but I don't see it the same way anymore. There's so many more spaces on the street than there used to be.
Yeah.
So could we also have the concern for electric cars?
Sure. Would it maybe cut the fees in half?
Yeah. So they're kind of 3 tracks, people with driveways, people without driveways, people with license.
And then some future council will have to sort of decide, well, now everybody has an electric car.
Well, that's right.
That's true, right?
Why not? It might not be that far. in the
No,
future.
but it certainly.
I mean, once you drive an electric car, you never want to go back. They're so fun.
So I'm just mindful of time, but I think we're making some good progress here, so it's great. We had wanted, planned this to end at 9, started 15 minutes late. I don't know if you still want to shoot for anything close to 9. Is that, you guys have time to stick around a little longer? It's up to you.
I just would have to make a quick phone call and then I could stay home.
Okay. How about you? And I'm saying that we have to, I'm just trying to set expectations since it's 10 out.
Yeah, I could stay a little longer.
Can I just ask you, putting these electric car rates in
Yeah.
as a separate item? So what is the base rate then? Since is it really half of 25? I mean, it doesn't matter. It could be.
12.50, I mean,
It could be.
yeah, why not? I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
you're gonna be paying it through, most people I think would pay it online, probably.
So the base rate. Okay, so
Just,
I'll
yeah,
read it, so make sure, don't check me on this.
so
So,
you could just say it's 50% of the other fees. It's up to you, Ron.
it's just harder, then this makes it plain. Electric car rates, base rate $12.50, no driveway, $25 driveway, second car 25. And third car 50.
Now, do they all have to be electric vehicles?
No, I think it depends, oh, right.
Oh, you mean, yeah,
No, I think it's just for the permit. For the car you're permitting.
Okay,
yeah.
that's fair. Yeah.
But so what about, what did you, I missed part of the conversation for the purpose of the notes where you were talking about, for like the cap on the number of cars,
Just thinking ahead to,
maximum number
because
of cars.
if we do 3, right now, we just have this one zone that this new rules would apply to. And so if someone living in there has 4 cars, they can go outside their zone and park that 4th car. But if we someday expand this to the whole borough, we'll have to think about where do they go with that home. But that's just a down wish. And so that's what the mom is saying. We allow 4 permits per household or something. So we'll just have to, but I think this will give us some good data to help us understand what some of the challenges for folks are.
Is 3 reasonable now?
That's the question. Do we think 3 is reasonable?
They could put pressure on the streets that are not to
That's true. So should we do a 4th right now?
It's really not equitable to someone,
What's not
to
equitable?
a neighbor who doesn't have a driveway. If one person has 4 permits,
Yeah,
I mean, they could basically park up most of the block.
yeah.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I mean, there was the 2 families I know that do.
I think the one on Windsor Avenue does.
Yeah.
And they kind of like park up big confident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. Since it's limited to the sticker zones right now.
Yeah,
On the south side, I can imagine people.
yes,
Therefore,
right.
Barbara, will there be an opportunity for public comment before 9?
I hadn't thought about that, but I was gonna say, yeah, just wanted to see what you guys thought. Yeah, sure, we can do that. Let's finish this a little bit and then we'll do that.
but just one other thought is the escalators from the way are 25%.
Yeah, that's what they were
What is their
suggesting.
suggestion? 100% and
It was
200%.
like the base rate and then the
Oh.
second is 100%.
But what did we do? We did
Yeah.
50%. We did 100% and then we did 200%.
Yeah, and
That
so,
makes sense.
okay, yeah, I'm, yeah,
And then
and we're in line with what they're saying, but it's not exactly the same.
Manager Bryant was saying something that I've heard many times before is that we can't create fees that actually aren't more than just recuperating the cost of
Right.
the program. And I think for this program, we're talking about improving the value of the streetscape.
Right,
So like, it's the cost of maybe we kept in a special account,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like that then could be used for streetscape, for complete streets
Sure.
improvements.
Yeah.
So it's not
Traffic
like,
calming.
yeah,
yeah, for
Right,
all sorts
exactly.
of streets. So it's not like we're not going to use it to pay salaries,
Right, it's not just
Right.
money going into the
except for
general.
the controllers.
Yeah, that's to kind of respond to Carolyn's
Yes.
email.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
So this would be more for,
Yeah.
Can I,
I like that, for traffic calming.
yeah, could I just make sure, there's just two things I want to make sure we nail down on this before we have a public comment. Are we saying we're comfortable with having a maximum at 3 permits right now? Is that where we're at, or do we want to
I
add
don't know, it
it?
seems kind of arbitrary. I feel like why not have 4 people have 4 cars?
Yeah.
It's not that often.
So with that, what, 400%? That what value?
Yeah, like at a high rate.
Yeah, yes, I agree, it should be
So-
high, because,
You know,
So right now we have the third card 100. Just seems to feel arbitrary, doesn't it? But, okay, 200, is that what Nelson Nygaard suggests?
they only went up to 3 permits, so, yeah.
Maybe that's a good question for the council, since it's not, like whether or not we would want to have a cap.
Well, you definitely want a cap of some sort, but where would you set it? You wouldn't want an unlimited.
Well, maybe you just want to check if we set the cap appropriately
Yeah.
for.
Right, well, the whole council's gonna talk about the whole thing, so, yeah, I think that would be part of it.
Fourth car, 400. Now that starts to actually get the actual cost.
Yes, it does,
That's the actual cost, closer to the actual cost rather than
yeah,
what we're actually subsidizing.
right, exactly, at the lower end, yeah.
Subsidizing.
Okay, and the other thing, just real quick, I
Oh,
wanted
no,
to.
sorry.
No.
Fourth car is 200.
Yeah, that's,
And the fourth electric car is 100. So
Yeah.
if you can really get a bargain for an electric car.
that's.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to get in the notes is that the issue of whether you have a driveway or not, we're not gonna have the borough do any kind of survey, I don't think. It's going to be the person who doesn't have a driveway is just going to, when they go in to apply for their permit, attest that they don't have a driveway.
Mhm.
And so that's how that would be handled, so we're not, trying to monitor all of that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the honor system, but,
It works really good. I think that works.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And we do
everyone
have-
are honest.
We have a number of driveways, I think, in the study, which I can tell you.
Yes.
There's at least a total number.
Oh, is there?
So we can know in the office, if it's like,
Yeah, well, it'll be, I think it'll be pretty obvious.
About that.
Yes.
It's the parking controllers who be out there scanning.
Right,
If they see,
Yeah.
they'll get to know what's going on.
Yeah. yeah,
They'll be like, oh, that's interesting. That car was in. The address of this car is the same address as this property that has a driveway.
right,
That
exactly.
doesn't make sense. Like, so it's not like there's nobody checking. It's-
Yeah, but it's not gonna be
It won't be
an
policing
audit.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Ira, public comment, please.
Yeah, Myra Winston, 317 Marion Avenue. So one thing I've seen at work, they switched from a system where the parking permit was a sticker attached to the car to a hang tag, which allows you to move it between cars, which avoids having to get a new permit when you get a new car. But it also addresses this issue about like, okay, so you don't want 4 cars parked there, but you don't want 4 cars parked there at the same time. But if you have these hang tags, that speaks to simultaneous cars parked on the block, not this car that's like in another city with the permit. So it's just a different way of administering. It could lead to, people like selling tags or, all sorts of other issues. But it's just something to think about because it does, in some ways it makes it a little bit simpler to manage because you're not constantly worrying about, now of course you could have a lost hang tag and that becomes a whole other issue. It's like, how do you know that they don't really still have it and this is a way to get a 5th tag. But I mean, just for consideration.
In our research, we discovered that, and manager Bryant confirmed this, that the kind of hang tags and UPC codes and parking stickers and all those kinds of things that get affixed to cars is sort of isn't being done by most municipalities anymore. Even like colleges and universities that are doing parking systems aren't. They're just scanning license plates.
Oh, the plane moves from.
And there's just sort of a database, so people are, so that it like the plates assigned to the VIN number, so that there's no more like.
Well, that's great.
It sort of simplifies the whole thing.
Yeah, it does. It just doesn't address this other point of it, with that you could sort of like, you have so many at a time. But it addresses the whole thing with this, like peeling the stupid sticker off.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
I remember that one,
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so. Well, we need to make a quick phone call.
If you don't mind.
Stick around.
Thanks.
Okay.
Michelle, how does it seem to you, like administering? Does it seem overly complex?
I don't think so, because I think the complex part will be getting the system set up to do it. And once it's set up, I think it'll just run on its own once we get all that in there. I think it's just the initial setup that's going to be time consuming.
Is there more time for public comment or?
Sure, we can do that when Bob comes back. Thanks. One thing we'll want to do before we close is settle our future meeting schedule. Samantha asked us to, so that we can just advertise more. Here's our meeting. So I was thinking the second and fourth Tuesdays at 8, if that works with you. That's kind of where we're at the moment, it seems like. Okay. Whether that would be good or if that's so very good.
So that would be the December 14th and 20th.
Yes. Yeah, the only issue I saw with like the 14th is that the next day, the 15th is the third Wednesday that we have council meetings that night, but it's really an issue.
Yeah, I think I could do it.
Well, and then going, I think we should then assume we do the same thing. January. Might be not too much longer. Because if we're meeting twice a month.
Yeah, I think I should do it for December and January, and then February it starts to schedule changes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Bob. Dave asked if he could make a public comment too, and I said sure when you came back. So
Okay.
Sure. When you're looking at the parking stickers, one thing you may want to keep in mind is those individuals that have cars for business, they're not allowed to use them unless it's business related. It's just something to kind of keep in mind. I don't think there's a lot of people who have business cars, but they are, especially those that work for various agencies. Really pretty strict regulations on that.
we were hoping to avoid anything like stickers or hang tags, anything that generates, in the end, will be some trash. So that was our hope. So
Sure.
hopefully we won't even have an issue.
Does that address your concern if there's no stickers or hang tags?
I mean, parking's not an issue for me. Maybe
No, I mean, you're concerned about individuals with cars for business.
Oh, just to let you know, I just know that they're, I'm just letting you know whether you do it or not.
So you're just pointing out that there could be an issue for something.
Yeah, well, when you're paying for parking, right? So if you don't have a driveway and you have 3 or 4 cars, one of them is a car that you have to use for work,
Mhm.
right? So that person who's paying that additional fee. right? That individual or company,
Oh.
it can be a sense of friction. Not serious, but they're not charging a lot for these parking permits. But if I have a driveway, and I don't, but let's say I have a driveway and I have 3 cars, and one is for business, but I can't use that car unless it's business related, right? But I have to use it for business, and I have 2 personal cars, right? And then the fees keep going up for each car that I have.
Oh, I see. It's almost like it's 2 different entities.
Correct. Because one of the cars I can only use for work.
I know what it is. So in this instance, like the automobile, the entity is the address. So like each address will be allowed a certain number of permits. And so like if you're using your address both for business and personal, I mean, if a person's doing that, they'll just have to choose which entity is going to be paying for the parking. They'll have to just choose, like, is it the business entity that lives at that address, or is it the individual entity that lives at that? The parking permit's associated with the address, not with the entity who lives at the address. In other words, if you have 3 children and each child has their own automobile registered in their name, it doesn't change the number of permits that you can have at that address. And in a sense, a business is just an entity like a child. It's like just a different automobile registration, but it's still registered at that address.
So that I understand. I'm saying that if I work for an organization where I have a car, right, and I have to use that car for business, and I can only use it for business.
Right.
So I go to and from work with it. Right. I travel with it. Right. But then it's parked. Right. When I come home, and then we have 2 other cars. Right. And we use those other cars for personal reasons. Right. Just, if you're putting a cap on the number of permits per house, what do you do with that car that's only to be used for business? If I work for a municipality or an agency, I don't think but it's something that.
Yeah, that's a reason to include the 4th permit, but I think, as part of that, it's just you're getting the perk of having a business car, so maybe you have to pay, a small fee to park it on the street if you want to park it on the street.
Was your issue, were you seeing more of a problem with the cap on the number of cars or more the fee issue?
For me, it's a personal.
No, I know, but you're representing an idea, so we're trying to understand the idea, so we get it covered. We're trying to be conscientious about making sure we attend to the question you're raising.
Yeah, no, it's just something to make you aware of that you could come across it. I don't know how.
I guess I don't see it any differently as it's a car that person uses, and so it doesn't trouble me at all if somebody has to pay a permit.
Yeah, it just came to mind. I mean, the one thing I wanted to bring up for public comment before is at the last meeting, there's a discussion about it seems like there's less cars on the road. I was here at the last meeting. And, I think one of the things we kind of have to keep in context when we're saying something like that is also kind of keeping it. And I do agree with that. At least I've seen less within Narberth itself, within some of the neighborhoods, in particular the neighborhood that I live in. But also keeping in context some of the reasons why that may be. The bridge has been out for years, and once the bridge was shut down before it's being repaired, traffic flow, it became considerably less in the neighborhood that at least I live in. Downtown, I see it a little bit less as well, but I think there's a big part of that contributes to it. COVID is one part of it, and then the other is you have 3 construction projects going on downtown. That is probably also as well cutting back on the number of cars that we're seeing. No different than when I walk to the office, a few mornings a week, I see less people using the train station than I did 5-6 years ago. So I think I do agree that there seems to be less cars on the road and that there's less individuals that are parking right now, but I think that there are other contributing factors other than just individuals that may not be using cars.
Yeah. I mean, one contributing factor I'm aware of is I have a 16-year-old, no interest in driving. To me, that's like, really? And apparently their peers are also not interested in driving and like don't want cars. And I know when I was 16, I wanted to drive and I wanted a car. And so like, that's a lot less cars if just taking an N of like a few kids that my kids are friends with. That's a lot fewer cars. It's like, it's just a factor. Like, I don't know whether it means anything or not, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely part of that. I mean, I think as children get older too, there's a reason they have a car. And I have friends with their children have no interest in cars, and I have other individuals where there's 4 or 5 cars in the house. Right. So I mean, and I think that there's an extreme there. You know, a family of 4 and they have 4 cars. I think that's kind of one end of the spectrum. And then you have a family where you have 2 kids that are driving, and you still only have 1 or 2 kids in the household.
Well, thank you, David. I'd like to move on. Were you able to?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to bring up is that from the parking standpoint of view, when we're just, I see it on, I'm trying to remember the name of the road, at least when I'm coming in up off onto Chestnut Avenue from Wynwood Road, how close cars can actually park to Wynwood Road. Sometimes when usually I'm making a left-hand turn up that road, sometimes just because of the sight lines, you can't see the cars coming down.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, usually I'm making that left turn, you can turn pretty slow when I'm doing it, because, you know, I know how quickly the cars are coming from the other direction on Wynwood, but maybe looking at the possibility of having a sign on Chestnut that goes into Wynwood that limits the amount of parking towards Wynwood Avenue.
Rob, is that something that should come through the traffic complaint review process?
I would like to, Michelle, we can maybe together remember to add that to the.
Yeah, if you could actually fill out a work order, that's how we track it.
Okay.
That'll go through the Public Health and Safety Committee, as well as they'll do the traffic monitoring devices and kind of do that assessment.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
And that's a pretty standard assessment that they have to make when they're painting the corners.
Yeah.
And like, so for example, I know several corners on the north side that were adjusted to increase that corner.
Exclusion.
The exclusion a lot. And like on the north side, that's been happening over the years pretty consistently, that those exclusions have been getting bigger and bigger.
Sure.
And like, so maybe they just need to get over there and look at, especially Wynwood Road.
Yeah, because there was an
Create bigger.
there was an intersection on the south side where they just recently did that review and put up, it extended the exclusion zone for parking because it was not regulation. So maybe this isn't. So yes, if you could report that, and our public works and traffic engineer will take a look at it.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so keeping us to an hour, I think we at this point should other things for our next meeting, set our future meeting dates. And I mentioned this to Rob, but Samantha asked us to come up with kind of a regular schedule so she could advertise that. So I was suggesting maybe, and just one advertisement, the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays at 8. Would that work for you guys for at minimum the month of December and January? I hope we don't have to go too much past that because there's
Also, like, expect new,
good point.
new council leadership, they might do something else with us. So
That's a good point. I hate to see that happen though, because I feel like we're making a lot of progress.
maybe we can finish up the work in 20.
We can try, but I think that's quite a, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm just not 100% sure we're going to
Unless you guys make a friendly request.
Exactly. Well, and I think we should. I mean, as long as you guys are amenable to that.
I'm game. I mean, I'd like to continue doing this work each week.
Yeah. How about you, Rob? Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I can do the 14th and the 28th.
Okay. But Bob was saying that maybe after the reorg in January, that maybe the new council would want a different group of people working on this. And I'd like to think that the three of us could consider that we could make a friendly request to have us continue.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Could we tell Samantha that, that we are proposing the second and fourth Tuesdays, and that she can advertise that for December, and then also something different for 2022, with the idea that we're probably going to just stop at some point.
I'm sorry, what's the fourth Tuesday in December?
Is that the
28th.
28th is the.
Oh, was that?
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Is there another time that we could have a second meeting in December?
Second.
So the 21st, we have a meeting on the 14th and then on the 21st. Okay. And then could we say the second and fourth Tuesdays for January and, you know, whatever else we might need to do in 2022?
That would be January 11th. And 25th.
Does that work for you, Bob? And then, okay, and then we'll just, you know, we'll,
Once it's 8 a.m.
yes, 8 a.m. And we'll see, you know, hopefully we can be done by then.
Okay.
And if we're not, then, but, you know, when you're doing the advertising for 2022, if you want to just, then why not? And, you know, hopefully we won't have to do too many more one-off advertising.
Yeah, I think starting in February, I don't think I can do the 81. Okay.
Would you consider, as chair, say, vetting some of these preliminary decisions with the council as a whole, so that we're not, so that we could get some agreement of some of these things that we think are on track before we get to the end of the process, because otherwise we're not going to have time to, like, say, take into consideration those council questions and concerns, and I think that could just push the process out further. Like if you wanted to say go with the fee structure, for example, and get that agreed on.
Yes, I think
Now, then we can move from there.
I think that's a really good idea, Bob. I hadn't wanted to give any details up till now because we weren't. We were so uninformed. But I don't want to just. I didn't want us to get derailed from coming up with something. So, you know, I think that's a good idea. I will. Do we do committee updates at workshop meetings? I should know. I'm not.
Yeah, we got
okay. I've just gotten so confused. I don't know why. So I could give that update Wednesday night. What we're proposing there.
The other thing is if we could, and I know you've begun this already with the list of questions.
Yes.
But we do have these technology questions that, you know, I think Samantha's working on.
Yes.
So, for example, the guest passes, I don't think we can fully figure that out until.
No, and you mean the question of how our current system works?
Well, yeah, it's all,
Because I,
from our minutes from last time. Guest passes.
because we got an answer to our October 26th question, and I put it in my email to you guys that I sent on Sunday. Yeah. The question was, does the current guest parking system automatically notify the parking enforcement officer of the permit? And Samantha found out, yes, it does. The officer can use their equipment to look up the license plate, see if there's a permit attached to it or not. So they know. And she said the system can handle fees if we decide to add them at some point. Because right now the guest pass is free.
It's free, okay, but people have to register.
Yeah, they have to, yeah, you can go through, they register right now already online,
Yeah,
or
it's
they're
already
coming
set up.
into the office,
Okay.
yeah, so.
Okay, good.
So we've gotten some of those questions answered. I think the one technology question that is kind of not a technology, but it's, that I think Samantha's still looking into is, can the existing parking meters be adjusted if we had wanted to change, the fee or the time limit or anything? Can we do that? Now,
I remember when we bought those heads, and I think they can be, I remember Charlie talking about how they can be less.
and it would be nice to know.
There might be limits.
Well, I know, there's probably limits, and it also would be nice to know, are they still functional enough that you could do that? Like, if you started adjusting them for break, because I don't know how late they are.
Are those the only questions we have? I mean, commercial parking is something on the agenda, and I don't have any notes next.
I don't
Municipal lots.
we didn't, we're gonna table commercial parking to next time. And, we have some other residential questions to go through. So we'll get that, and, yeah, that would be great. Okay, all right, close this. Michelle, any parting thoughts or anything?
No, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for stepping in.
We're adjourned, so stop the recording. Thanks so much.